Good evening. Welcome to Culture Through Our Eyes, the first of several sessions discussing issues of culture in the contemporary. We might look back, but we're looking to see how we can move it forward at this time. Culture Through Our Eyes is a quote from Professor Camo Brathwaite, who was saying that if we want to understand the Caribbean aesthetic, we really must be able to see culture from our point of view, not the colonizers, not the other, not anyone else claiming you do or do not have culture, but through your eyes, culture through our eyes. This evening, we are pursuing a fantastic session which my graduate students created. It's called Identity, Gender, the Priesthood, Where Are We Now? There are two graduate students in cultural studies, but they're actually at Codrington College. One is a priest, one is a full priest, and one is just as being confirmed as a deacon. So I will not upstage them anymore. They will come and they will speak to their topic. But also I want to welcome the Reverend Dr. Sonia Hinds, who celebrates 30 years in the ministry and as a female priest is especially interested in this topic. Thank you.
Barbados, and for the Anglican Church in Barbados in particular, it was a very important moment on July 25th, 1994. It was the Feast of St. James. The cathedral was packed and overflowing, covered a lot by all the press in terms of written press and television. And quite a number of people, Anglicans as well as non-Anglicans, wanted to witness an historic event. For me personally, I didn't realize the impact, I guess, as much until after. But that night was a telling story for the church. I have images in my mind of that particular occasion. I remember, for example, the late Dame Basie Welsh, looking down from the cathedral and from upstairs and seeing her hurrying to get into the cathedral on that night. The now Prime Minister was Minister of Education, and she was present. And the late first female Governor General, Dame Nita Barrow, was also present. So it was a very, very important moment for the church and for Barbados.
Seminarian, Scotland, you are male. Have you ever had, what are you thinking about as you become a priest? And are you aware that your female colleagues perhaps have some apprehensions about going into the priesthood?
Well, it's not really apprehension per se. It's just that, unfortunately, you're accustomed to see males in that role. It's just unfortunate that the patriarchal system has permeated everything so far. But as a male, I do not see anything wrong with seeing a female priest, because I think that God created both male and female to reach each other. And sometimes women could actually reach even to males than even males would reach some males. And the state of the church at present, we look into the pews, it's mostly women. So if 70% of your church is women, what's going to happen after a while?
That is true. That is true. Deacon Oneka Morgan, you proffered this topic. Please tell us why. First of all, congratulations, you were ordained in December. And why did you think of this topic? Why did you think this was an important topic to be discussed?
Well, I wouldn't take all the credit. It's really the Reverend and my classmate who actually, I think, pushed most of it. But it is still relevant, as we say, because you were surprised that this is still happening. There is still some pushback. There is still, so then if you are surprised, then I think many other persons may be of the same. So it's good to have the conversation, find out where people are at, and get some feedback, as well as give our own experiences and insights.
Yes, now, audience, you are looking at a steel pan player who was a member of the carnival committee. So there are a number of identities there that perhaps very conservative persons would not expect of a priest. Would you like to comment on that, Deacon Morgan?
Well, that's my first degree was in carnival studies at the Center for Creative Arts in UWI St. Augustine. As you mentioned, Pan was even before that, so I definitely like Pan and the arts and all that. So I thought that that's a good way to go. And then later I worked mostly in the Carnival, well, at the Carnival Development Corporation. Spent about 11 years there in culture, and I did some further studies while there. And then things change. As they say, the rest is history. But definitely always was involved in church, and I guess, as you say, got a calling for to do deeper work, I should say, in the
Okay.
church.
I know that one of the topics we can debate if we have the time is the spiritual versus
Carnival and culture.
secular. And what is always represented as an oppositional existence, but they exist in you both. Some members of the congregation might not be quite pleased with that. So we can go into that. I just want to check to see if Wasim is here with us. If he isn't, we'll continue. Okay. So Reverend Hinds, are you surprised
Yes, ma'am.
that this young lady and her Reverend, I believe she is referring to Reverend Johnson, threw up this topic for debate? Is there a gendered problem? Is there antagonism within the church or the congregation towards female priests?
At first, I'm not surprised Reverend Rosalind or Reverend Oneka brought this topic. I think it's a topic that we might have to revisit, and that we might have to even consider having some conversation about again, even though 30 years have passed in the Caribbean. But I also want to go down the road of talking about the presence of persons like the same Dame Nita Barrow, who was present at the ordination on that night, and began by talking about a letter she went back to and write, and I still have her handwritten copy. Among which she talked about a cloud of witnesses being present that night. And I think maybe talk about identity, even though the Webster dictionary might define it as, a distinguishing character or personality of an individual, that we can't separate individual identity from what is happening collectively. So by that I mean, for example, I agree with the quotation by Rhonda West in Our Roots, Our Lives. And when she said, first, I am a child of God. And that brings in Leslie's point about the whole question of creation and recognizing identity grounded in who we are as children of God, in our collective identity. So why we might be able to talk about identity in terms of the individual calling of Sonia or Oneka or whoever, the topic allows is an opportunity for us to link identity with gender, with the whole question of being called, as Oneka tells us, and looking at it in the context of what it means for the Anglican priesthood in particular. With women like your mother, Miss Burrowes, who was very actively involved in the Mothers Union, would have been those women that a lot of what would have happened in terms of women's leadership in the church would have been part of that before the ordination. So really, by the time 1994 came around, I, along with Beverly and others, would have been standing on the shoulders of, I think your mother's name was Hazel. Was it
Yes, it
Hazel?
was.
Well, would have been standing
Hazel, yes.
on the shoulders of Hazel Burrowes and many other dedicated and committed women in the church. I still have my gift from the Mothers Union, which is a very important gift. It was a gift of the Book of Common Prayer. So that it will allow us to continue to take seriously this call as women who were called now into the ordained ministry. But this thing about identity and gender is even more critical when we look at it from the book of Genesis, as Leslie brings out. But even when we go into the New Testament, we hear Jesus asking a very important question. In fact, the most famous question about identity in the New Testament was posed by Jesus in Mark 8:20, when he asked, "Who do you say that I am?" So I noticed how subtle it was, not directly and starkly like, "Who am I?" But "Who do you say I am?" And it highlights the nuance when you really study it, that identity does not depend only on one's own declaration, but also on the assessment of others. In other words, what others perceive us to be can affect how or who we are too. And what does
Yes.
this, so it is then brings us into the question of gender. I like the quotation by Kathleen Drayton, who is now deceased, but was an educator and taught for many years at the University of the West Indies in the Faculty of Education. She said, "Your image of yourself as male, masculine, or female, feminine, is shaped, or just one, is shaped by many factors.
Oh,
This gen-
it's a word.
Sorry?
Shaped by many factors. Yes, okay. Your
Okay,
image is shaped by many
I think
factors.
I just want to plug in this thing before. And this gender identity is influenced by biology, social upbringing, and experiences of all kinds with both males and females. Gender is a concept you form, and concepts change and develop over time. That's Kathleen Drayton, I think, speaking directly to this topic this evening. So for us who are members of the Christian church, whether we're in the Anglican denomination or not, our image of ourselves is also shaped by our theological understanding of the creation of human beings as expressed in the book of Genesis. In terms of the linking it with the call to the priesthood, I mean, the topic is priesthood, but I rather prefer to talk about the ministry of the priests for the purpose of this paper and dealing with the time constraint factor. It allows us to see that those of us who are called to be priests and to minister as priests, must all of them approach this call both as women and men made in the image of God. And that then we are called to certain ministries because of this whole question of priesthood. I don't know if you want me to look into where we are now, or if you want to come back to that. And I prefer to
I'll
come
back to that.
Yeah, okay.
I'll make a round.
Yeah.
Leslie,
Sure.
at the moment, the only male, we are expecting Wasim. Give us a bit of your background. You are young. I am going to presume you're 10 years old, so we'll leave it there. Your decision to go into the priesthood in Antigua, and what do you anticipate? You made a point. You think because you're male, they might be more accepting of you than what your colleagues are experiencing. Go ahead.
Yes. Yes, I used from Antigua, as I said. I used to be in the supermarket business. I used to be a branch manager of a local chain of supermarkets before I came into. What got me into ministry is that I've noticed back home, there are a lot of retired priests that are basically have to be coming back on rotation, and there is none there. And one time during a Lenten service in 2021, Venerable Valentine Hodge, he basically collapsed while elevating the host during a Lenten service. And I said to myself, this is foolishness. When I've heard the reason why of the whole issue, it really touched my heart and hurt my soul. So I said, you know what? I just put my hand in the ring. Lord, send me, stop being Jonah, become Isaiah, and the rest is history.
My goodness.
Wow.
Yes. And are you looking forward to being a deacon?
by God's grace, that's the first stage. And yes, serving is the most ideal way to start within such ministry.
Okay. So Deacon Morgan, as I say, you and yourself and Reverend Johnson threw up this topic. What particular issue would you like us to discuss now? What is the pressing issue you want us to discuss? We can discuss 3, but let's hear you. What's your pressing issue? Why was it important to throw this up?
You're muted, Oneka. You're muted, Oneka.
Yes, sorry. Yes, so personally, I have not, well, being a deacon, I think my diocese and the clergy has been very supportive. So that pushback, I have not really felt it in directly, I should say. But in terms of listening to other person's stories, indirectly hearing, comments and so on, I think that too, affects me anyway. But for me, I'll go back to the 3 is, well, maybe at least one issue is the fact that even after ordination, or even after the go ahead and the legal part has been, okayed, there are other issues of accommodation for priests. So I have heard of so churches putting in infrastructure for females and women. You might need an extra bathroom or extra space to accommodate female clergy. There are other things such as because maybe sometimes you might say the language in prayers. I know Reverend Hinds, has mentioned that a couple of times. The prayers and we generally go ahead with the male representation of humanity, but then in some cases the language may need to be adjusted or changed. Just a number of other issues as well. I know of one case, I think it's one of the oldest theological seminaries in England. They have now accommodated female ordinance, but then the female is not allowed to preside, or females are not allowed to preside over the Eucharist. So yes, females are there in terms of being a part of the seminary, but female priests coming in to preside over the Eucharist, that has not happened. That's it. So it's just, so while we have the, in some cases, legally, the rights and so on, there are some accommodations that have to be made or it's in progress.
Hey, that's worrying. That one I have not heard. Every time I speak with these young ladies, I learn more. I am hoping, well, Wasim shared with me what was happening in Guyana. So I will speak a bit on it and then he'll join us. He noted that in Guyana, the kickback sometimes comes from the congregation. The male priest will appoint female servers or female acolytes. The congregation will say no. And there's a little battle between the congregation and the priest. The priest is perhaps more outgoing, more keeping up with the times, but the congregation is resistant. And that's a particular point perhaps he can speak more on when he joins us. Reverend Hinds, have you encountered
that? It didn't come from the congregation or from the lay people, in my experience. What I found was in my case, though, in the early days, is that I have received a lot of support and solidarity from non-Anglicans. So I had grown close to the Methodists and the Moravians who had already responded to this question about ordination of women. And among them, at that time in Barbados, the Methodist Church had female ministers ministering in Barbados, and they were very supportive. So I remember being invited to the Moravian Church and given a presentation. I've been invited to the Methodist Church by these Methodist female ministers, being very supportive. I had an experience. I think that that might be helpful for us as we continue to reflect about the pushback. Because although it might seem on the surface that the congregations might push back, or the lay people, or the ordained people, it has to do with how we've been socialized, and which is where the gender question comes in. Talk about what is male and how males should operate, and what is female and what that should look like. So if we've been I don't want to say brainwashed, but we've been socialized to believe that males should be priests. And I had that experience while serving in the Diocese of the Windward Islands of a priest not coming to receive the sacrament of Holy Communion while I was the person administering the sacrament. So he was a priest, although in this province that has already ordained women, and it wasn't a case of the congregation. In my case, it was a case clearly of sometimes some male clergy who might still be struggling with this whole thing. I heard of a case of someone who told Bishop Broom not to send Beverly or I to that particular parish. So I mean, this is almost 30 years ago. So yeah, hopefully what has happened over the last 3 decades that there have been some positive changes. And there have been, I guess, the fact that Oneka has not had any pushback might suggest that things are moving along, or it might also suggest that women are becoming assertive and recognizing that they are created too in the image of God. God called them like how God has called men, and need to be bold and confident in going forward in what they're called to do.
Would you like to respond, Oneka?
Just to mention though, the Dr. Sonia mentioned something about the priest not receiving communion because she was celebrating. But up to recently, we have, well, at least I have witnessed that already up recently. So maybe it's not the popular way now, but somehow it's still there. But I still think it's maybe personalized. So each preference of a particular person, male, which we still have to, I guess, talk about. It's easier if we know than if you pretend that you're okay with us and then you just don't receive the sacrament at a particular time. So for me, it's good if I know upfront that this is you don't believe this, or this is not your thing. So for me, it's good if I know upfront. I don't know how many would say upfront. Some may,
Yeah,
but
that's what you got to be careful of. I have experience where people didn't say that upfront, but then you have the experience that they're not. Dr. Burrowes, I wonder if you would like to pull in Professor O'Moore before he slips away.
I was about to do that. Professor Elson, before you, as Dr. Hinds said, slip away, would you like to join, make a comment, observation? Or maybe he slipped away.
He's gone
It
already?
is 7, so he might have gone. Professor Omo? He might have gone. He might have gone. But
Oh,
Reverend Hinds sent a
she's
note.
gone.
If
Mhm.
there's anyone online who would like to make a comment, a contribution before we keep talking, so this can be interactive, just put it in the chat or raise your hand. There are, by the way, 44 persons online, so this has happened quite rapidly. So good night to everyone. Would anyone like to make a comment before we continue with the topic? Reverend Hinds did say that she would like to hear some responses. So the floor is open.
Maybe if there's any male clergy that might want to speak, might be
Male
good
or
to hear.
male or female clergy? Is anyone online? I know Reverend Johnson is Jew, but maybe I have
She's here. She's here.
there. Hello, Reverend Johnson. You're quietly sitting in the background. We're going to call you up. Wasim, who was to join us, is unable to join us. So the three of you, Deacon Morgan, Seminarian Scotland, and Reverend Hinds, you will be carrying the discussion. No one is coming forward so far, so we can continue. Let me say what some of my students said to me. They said to me, sometimes it can be an outward statement. A member of the congregation might come to the female priest and more or less say, I don't believe in you, and cite the Bible where you cannot, apparently for them, find a female priest anywhere in the Bible. So they return to what may have been not prehistoric, but early times when women were not ordained. There are examples in some countries in the Caribbean where there are no female acolytes, that the particular church does not allow for young girls to serve. Then there is the understanding that sometimes you can be open in your hostility. I listened to Oneka and very closely, and Reverend Hinds, who Reverend Johnson, who is online. Seminarian Scotland. Have you heard of such instances? Have your in Antigua? Do you have female acolytes in Antigua?
Yes, we do have female acolytes in Antigua. Yes, we do. It's not so much bad like that, but I have seen women priests been unfortunately ostracized because they are female and they're not male priests. So both here and back home. So I would say that. But unfortunately, the acolytes per se, you come as server, once you're a child coming through the ranks, teenager, even as a young adult, it's normal. So we don't really say anything about. Would not know what happened before my time because I came up in the 80s, 90s. So basically, so I do not know what happened before that, but I can tell you from the 80s, 90s, we work together with each other as servers, as coming up in the church.
Mm-hmm. But you are aware of instances of hostility?
Yes, I am. You have some churches that are traditionally all male for servers, and that's it. Same like all male for choirs. It's because of the whole traditional aspect. So yeah, it's steep in tradition, but as any other, everybody knows, if it's not really supposed to be, it will end.
Okay, so this is a new issue thrown out. Are we tackling tradition? Should we keep at it because tradition kind of likes to lean with the comfortable, lean with the accepted? Reverend Hinds, what do you think?
Tradition doesn't mean that nothing changes, which is what one of the wonderful things about the sermon preached by Bishop Rufus Broom on that night. I think he spent a lot of time using biblical references for the importance of tradition, but that tradition doesn't mean that you don't change. That isn't what the Bible teaches. And I think that as more and more persons, men and women, continue to discern God's call for whatever, that we will sense that culture sometimes interferes or can interfere with God's call. So it might not be a case of biblical evidence as persons talk about when they talk about tradition, as much as it might be about culture. Although they're so intertwined, that it's difficult to sometimes for persons to separate. So I mean, I'm glad listening to Leslie and Oneka as a young, as kind of the offsprings of the whole movement for ordination of women in the Caribbean, as they have no experience of exclusion, which happened, because I know of a time when they were all male choir here in this diocese. I know of a time when the questions that were asked about women being priests had to do with, but what's going to happen when their menstruation come? What's going to happen when they get pregnant? What's going to happen when they get, which are no questions now. And I think the reason why there might not be these kinds of questions now might be because I think the culture is also changing. But also I think people are beginning to understand that the God that created us continues to be a God that kind of moves us forward to be able to answer the call faithfully. Yeah. Somebody is mentioning something in the chat that you might want to pick up on, Danielle.
Yes, I just saw it. So the chat is merrily going on. Oh, Professor Omo says, I would have liked to talk about this as a parallel experience in the spiritual Baptist. I covered these gender issues in my dissertation in 2000, but I've got to run to my class as it begins in a minute. Love the topic. Dr. Hinds did a fantastic job talking about this complex topic. Congratulations, Dr. Hinds. There was a message just now. I think Oneka made a crucial point. Many persons pretend that they accept you, but sometimes when you go into spaces, you see the reality. You still have to work 2 times harder to be accepted and respected. Danielle, I'm presuming you're a priest. Would you like to talk? Well, come online and tell us. You speak as though you are experiencing this in your vocation.
I
Danielle.
am not a priest at this point in time. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
But I do serve in leadership positions. Right now, I am a full-time missionary. And that is something that can be a little strange for people, for a young single woman to be a missionary and then to serve in leadership capacities. And as I say, sometimes people say, yes, we accept you, but then when you go into these spaces, you recognize that probably if you were male, the pushback that you're receiving is not one that a male counterpart would receive. And so sometimes you see them say, yes, we accept you. We want women to step up and come to the plate and do what God has called them to. But then when you do have the opportunity to stand up and to say something and to make a difference, there's this pushback. But I'm still grateful for the ones who are true, those men who continue to support us as females in the clergy and in ministry and continue to champion for us. But I will say that sometimes there is still that underlying pushback that you receive.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah, I want to support Danielle. Sorry, Dr. Burrowes.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was saying that she has a point about the persons that say one thing and then don't. But I want to go a little further and talk about women who sometimes put themselves in a position where they are not supportive of other women in the priesthood. And sometimes that perhaps is the challenging part for those of us who are called. That sometimes the pushback comes not from males, but comes from some women who are still caught up in thinking that we really shouldn't be doing this kind of, we shouldn't be in this thing altogether. Although this is not in our context in the Caribbean, the woman that spoke to Donald Trump, the President Donald Trump, she spoke directly to him. But one of the criticisms that was offered online that I read is that she shouldn't be in the pulpit in the first place. I was kind of what persons were saying, and these people that were saying it were Christians. So there's still some people that think that women should not be even in the pulpit. So my experience in the early days was that I was a youth leader. So as a youth leader, I was well received because you're contributing to the whole youth ministry. And that one of the things that I remember that saddened me is that I thought with all the support I was getting as a youth leader, that I would have gotten this support when I was able to articulate that God called me, but that didn't come either. So it's like I think persons are able to support you at a certain point if you're a woman, but not any further. And that includes women, not just men. And sometimes the women find it difficult to support you because they want to be on the side of men, or because they too are ignorant about the whole gender issue. So I'm glad that this topic includes gender.
Yes, I see Danielle has responded, that's truth.
Yeah.
Danielle, would you like to just tell us, you don't have to give us your exact age, we can say 10, but how long have you been in ministry? You
I think
sound
she-
very young. Oh, she gone?
I
She's-
sound very young. I love that. I've been doing youth ministry from maybe about 13 years old. I came into full-time ministry 3 years ago. So, and I'm going to be 33 in a month's time.
No, you should have kept us guessing. You said 20. You have a very youthful sounding voice, but you said that you're questioned as a female in the position that you're in. As a female, particularly, gender becomes an issue.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes gender comes up as an issue, and I can see it. I think sometimes it's even plain as day. And so I've had to come up with mechanisms to prove that, listen, I know that this is a gender thing, and it's not based off of my qualifications, it's not based off my calling, but I know for sure if I were born with different parts, we would not be having these conversations. So it's something that's out there. And I know that the church is progressing and moving forward, and I'm really grateful for that. But there's still some things that we need to. And so there, and as the Reverend was saying as well, sometimes some women might think that we don't deserve to be there. Like, who are you? Are you better than anybody else to say that you are being called? So there's some things that are out there that we are still battling with, but I believe that there's still a real.
Yeah.
Okay, Reverend Lynn
Yes.
Harper Johnson, I'm going to call you out. You're my graduate student. You're cultural studies. Good night.
Good evening.
Do you have any? Yes, good evening. You and the flowers, I know that well. Any comments so far? What would you like to share?
Well, it's quite interesting. My sister Sonia, I remember those days way back then when she was a young deacon, and I was then considering moving from the position of being a lay person to full-time ministry. And we would have had many a conversation with regards to the going forward. And it was quite interesting that because I was ordained in another denomination at first and served abroad, one day on my way going back to one of the countries I was serving, I met another colleague who's a colleague with me now. And the person said to me, you know, I love you very much. I have nothing against you, but I don't agree with having women ordained as priests. And I mean, this is many years after Dr. Sonia would have made her vows. And I said to the person, and I love you very much, and I will continue to use my gifts and skills as God has called me to within the church. And a lot of the comments that were made this evening are not peculiar to the Anglican Church. They may raise their heads in a different way, but it is the same thing. where there are still persons who feel threatened or upset that women have been called to ministry. And very often, some of these are in senior positions. And what they do is that they suppress you. For instance, I know in the other place where I served, we had someone who came to the highest position as in leadership, and gifted person, wonderful person in Christ, and they made life.
Once your voice is going down, check, is your audio or it is
Yes, I
ours?
thought it was my audio actually,
Yeah.
but does everyone
Check
realize
your,
it?
yeah, see if you're
Yes,
moving
I
away from
was
your,
checking my audio thinking it was me.
yeah.
I'm very
Lynn?
sorry. Where I am, the internet is being very iffy. So
We can
please.
hear you better now. Go ahead.
So this person served God, but the males made it so, because she was surrounded by her main team were males, and they made it so difficult for her that eventually she had to leave and go abroad to the States. And it was because she was a female. There are other times that you find that as a female, they may not come out and tell you face to face, but as Oneka said, and the other young lady, Miss Danielle, that when you come into certain space, you know that it is just a smile, but behind the smile, there's something else happening. And I believe if you as a female, or don't even let's go female, you as a person called by God, and you feel that calling upon your life, and you know this is what you want to do, then you have to be strong. Otherwise, you will find that there's so many things coming against you sometimes that you will give up and run. When I heard Reverend Sonia speak about the whole issue of females, that sometimes they're female, sometimes it's very sad that even among your own females, there are some of them who they are females, but they're operating as though they have to prove a point in a man's world. And so there's some of them who may find themselves in position of authority or leadership, and they suppress other females. So it is really a very interesting topic, and I believe as we speak about the identity of who here tonight, it is about you knowing who you are. If you don't know who you are, if you can say I am, then and you're waiting for people to confirm who you are and what God has called you to do, then issues just like these, which will come and go, will continue to flow us. And that is my little take so
Thank
far.
you. Thank you, Reverend Lynn. I'm watching the time, and so I think we may have time for at least 2 more discussions. Reverend Sonia, it seems that being female, your calling is questioned. There is an assumption that maybe you can't have heard right because you're a female. Is the calling question because of your gender? And that is the essence, very important to your priesthood. Is there
Yeah,
a calling?
yeah, I think, I mean, it is understandable. I mean, if you have a church that has for centuries, and the Roman Catholic Church is the largest denomination, they still have this position that only males are called to be priests. So the Anglican Church, yes, we came out 300, 400 years ago. Leslie will give me the correct age, or Oneka, this brain still fresh with this history. So we relatively old. But I mean, even but for years, we've been conditioned that men are called to be priests. In fact, one of the persons that influenced me to be a priest was a man. Who else, right? I wanted to be a priest like him. And that might sound paradoxical or nonsensical, but how else can it not be? So it's just that I can't be a priest like him. I got to be a priest that is female or in a female body, as Danielle will remind me, so that I'm able to, the gifts that I'm called to exercise will be done through a body that is very feminine. And so the gender is questioned because I think people don't understand that the gender is, as Kathleen Drayton and others like Eugene Barbados have tried to say, it's like a social construct. It is what the society says what a man should do, what a woman should do. Sorry, what it means to be a masculine, what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine. But that we are called male and female, creating he, them. So it's trying to make sense of that. So that when people question, at this stage now, I sometimes ignore or I sometimes dismiss. And if the person is genuinely willing to engage in a conversation, then we can get into, some talk around the biblical evidence that allows people to see that it is not only about denying women, but it's also saying being disobedient to God who called women.
Yes, our dean has posted, so Dean Combo, if you would like to speak to it, Dean Combo has posted, barring women from priesthood denies equality, limits spiritual leadership, and ignores their potential contributions to humanity. Dean, would you like to follow up the comment?
Oh, yes, thank you very much, Chair. I completely agree with the sentiments that have been shared here. And this is very important, and I'm so glad that this theme has featured in this discussion and dialogue at the time when we are celebrating the essence of culture. And so this idea of barring women from priesthood is a very old and archaic discriminatory cultural practice across the board, many cultures. And in fact, even in the biblical times, we can go all the way back. But the problem is with the 21st century is that these archaic barriers are still they're actually being propagated at the moment with the contemporary societies. So that's the point of contention here. Do we look forward into the future where we have equality of every human being on the planet? Or should we go by the cultural discriminations and divisions that have occurred over the historical time period? So anyway, that was just my point. But barring women from priesthood denies their equality to contribution to humanity. And so that was my point right there. Thank you, Chair.
Quite agree with you, sir. Embert Charles says, great discussions, but alas, we are preaching to the converted. The discussion must continue. Embert, would you like to follow through this point? Embert Charles?
I think he's left the meeting.
Left the meeting? Well,
Yeah.
the discussion will continue next week, guided by the outstanding Ghanaian scholar, Reverend Eshun, who will be coming in to us from London. So this is a 2-week discussion, although I have seen his proposed topic, and I think he's thinking along the lines of Professor Combo, that we need to think of humanity and universal constructs of humanity and equality from a human perspective. And that if we proceed that way, then the gender distinction may not be relevant, but there's a lot of fight to be held. Leslie, I haven't heard from you in a while. Your thoughts?
I wanted to say this before I came back
Oh, Professor Omo. Yes, we called for you or you weren't. It sounds like, honestly, like the Garden of Gethsemane.
I got confused with the time. You weren't there. I got confused with the time difference and I skipped out and then I'm back. It is, what you said is wonderful. As a organizational scientist, right? Change scientist. I look at culture from the basis of basic assumptions And you can't confront people with basic assumptions, really. They would go into denial and they would go into flight, right? So basically, when we're looking at a strong cultural ethos here where around power, right? But historically, we have this basic assumptions of who should lead. Who should lead is about power. And who should lead, even though women have been leading in the internal boundary in terms of their homes, they're not recognized as powerful in their homes, even though they've been managing their homes, even if it's even if it's a nuclear family, right? And not even if it's a single, but if it's a nuclear family, even if it's an extended family, you still see in organizational life the basic assumption around who should lead is still a male, even though they're incompetent. So leadership is not about competence, right?
We know it.
Right. So my dissertation in 2000 on the spiritual Baptist raised this question because, looking at it, the whole question came up about, even though it's from a grounded perspective, the question of gender came up, the question of identity came up, right? And they were saying, and of course, the Anglican Church, the spiritual Baptists have modeled themselves over through, on the Anglican Church in Barbados, in Trinidad, to the Catholic, right? The dominant religion, you had to do that in order to coexist. That was, you had to do that. So even as a spiritual Baptist minister, some of the most beautiful hymns that I like to sing are Anglican hymns. But I have a problem with them because from a cultural perspective, they're very individualistic, right? It is I, and our community, when we look at it in terms, is our, is we, us. But you say, well, I, and I, so sometimes when I start to sing, I say, we, right? So there's a way in which, in terms of decolonizing, our colonial experience, we have to rewrite our hymns. We have to rewrite the liturgy. We have to rewrite these things because culture, language is the expressive form of the culture. So if you don't trouble the language, you don't trouble your colonized experience. That is intact, right? So the females then would from my perspective, I would say, look, because you learn, you transform culture. I mean, from my perspective as a group relations consultant, you transform culture through experiential. It is experience is the greatest form of learning.
Yes.
So experiential learning, then, I would have, if I were, the bishop, I think I'd say a bishop in here. So I'm not putting any thing on him. But with the bishop, I would have put the females, I would have put the females in different parishes and alternate them around parishes, because experientially you're telling these folks, you're not telling them, but you're showing them how the different ways in which they can engage gender. And therefore, that would be the form of transformation. That's for me, that would be a truer form of transformation than telling. Telling doesn't change people. Confronting people doesn't change people. But working with folks, right, it would be a form. And of course, I celebrate that, Dr. Cannon, Sonia Hinds is also the dean of rural, right? So it is a way in which her presence transforms, right? See, her presence transforms just by just engaging her, transform the question of leadership, who should lead, and how women's leadership is much different. I think for me, working in corporate sector and nonprofits is again the same. The dynamic is the same, right? In terms of gender leadership, right? So I think that the engagement around now the educational system. We just had a very damning report from the World Bank that dropped today, right? I don't know if you all read it
Tell us quickly. I haven't had a chance to read it.
Barbados Today, right? Barbados Today. I mean, Dr. Hurley Beckles talked about it, and the director of CXC talked about it a few months ago. But this damning report just came out. So the chief education officer says our education system is archaic. It doesn't serve the purpose. It does not respond, right? What it does, it doesn't produce critical thinkers. It is about memorization. So we have elite memories. Remember everything, so they get the scholarships, right? But in terms of, and someone said it to me at MIT, of our scholars coming up there, right? Our scholars from the schools coming up there, they can't think, right? They're good with the rote stuff, but they can't think. So I think that the change that is coming right across the Caribbean, and I think that women are leading this change. If you look at it, a lot of women are leading the change. And so I think these transformations, the hard work that Dr. Hinds is doing and Oneka is doing, and Audrey, Johnson and Lynn, I think the hard work that you all are doing, I would say press on. We got a song like press on, the hymn say press on, right? Press on, because the change, sometimes you don't feel the change, but the change when you're in it is actually happening because you are staying, and that's the change.
Isn't that wonderful? Professor Elson, I've made a number of notes. The alternating, I would like Reverend Johnson and Reverend Dr. Hinds and maybe Oneka and of course, Seminarian Scotland. Would that be helpful if we were to put females, alternate them in various parishes, let parishes come into contact with various styles of preaching and teaching? What do you think, Reverend Dr. Hinds?
Actually, what is happening now, we got quite a few clergy women across the diocese. I think in the context of Barbados diocese, that we are seeing a lot of and I would say in every deanery, there are 4 deaneries that there are women there. So it might be something that we can look at more and analyze a bit more. But I think both in the rural parishes and certainly in the urban areas that the women are there.
That's nice. Leslie, what do you think? Scotland?
Yes, I do think that there should be a rotation so that persons should get accustomed. But it's been a while now. As Dr. Hinds has placed before us, she has been a deacon since 1994. And she was ordained a priest in 1996. So that's a lot of years. So the thing about it, I think it's not just rotation, but we should have an education system set up so that we can inform our congregants that it is okay for a woman to be a priest. But as I said, by now it should be. But as I said, tradition, old ignorances, we have to be stepping up to the times. And a lot of people don't like that whole thing called change, because they think that change makes everything becomes not familiar anymore, and that, oh, how are we going to look at it from this aspect, and it's going to be the different message. No, I've heard women preach and can make some sermons that would make any man blush. And I'm honest to say that I've heard some women, even I've heard Reverend Hinds, I've heard Reverend Harper Johnson, when they don't mix words. Just the other day, we were at a funeral when Reverend Harper Johnson spoke about a friend that she had to lay to rest, God rest his soul. But the thing about it, the passion, the whole aspect of the message that she put forth from that sermon, it doesn't have to be a man or woman thing. It is a human point of view. We have this human condition, and we as human beings should look at what we're going together, no matter the plumbing. Simple as that.
No matter the plumbing. I love it. Dr. Deacon Oneka. What says you?
It would be remiss of me not to mention that I don't know if it's the future identity of the diocese, but of my diocese of the Windward Islands. But at my ordination, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it in class before, but at my ordination, we had a female gospeler, we had a female preacher, we had a female litanist, and we had female readers. So practically, all the positions and some were held by females. So it is a plus in the conversation that we're having. So it's not all negative, doom and gloom. But on the other hand, we only have 4 female priests. So yes, and that accounts for, I think, let me see, it's about 27% full functioning female priests. That's about 27%. And if we look at the whole female representation in terms of clergy, deacons, and priests, we're looking about 43% female representation. So it's not that, me personally, I'm not looking for 50% or equality and equal numbers. I think it's the conversation that we're having now says that if you're called, you're called. So it's female, it's male, you're called. I think the other conversation we will be having is that we're not getting people, female or male, neither female nor male, coming forward. And that is our concern. That is my concern right now.
I believe we might have to do that next week because we've been going a good hour and 10 minutes. Professor Elson, I think press on perhaps is the most positive thing that we can hear. Andrea Brathwaite comments. The church itself needs to host discussions like this and seek other opportunities to showcase the invaluable contributions of marginalized groups in our community, including female clergy, to assist with breaking down the barriers to their acceptance. Excellent discussion. I look forward to next week's edition. Well, I'll give you a heads up. Professor Elson, this is a lovely topic. I don't know if he's going to go with it, but Dr. Eshun has sent the topic, courage to be, exclamation, multiple human identities in the midst of history, globalization, and creolization. That's his working topic at the moment. But it kind of, I think, links with what you were saying, that the courage to be, to reach for what Camo says, culture through our eyes, that we reject whatever we have been conditioned to think, look around you, see the changes. As our final wrap-up notes, I'm going to Reverend Hinds. Final comments, ma'am.
I was just going to add and be the change to that piece on Camo.
Oh, be the change. I'll send him that. Be the change.
So that's an excellent way I think to wrap it up.
I just want to make a plug for all of you who are here, please, before Dr. Sonia say anything, and to say that certainly our bishop here is
he online?
Let me just speak to me. When I returned here just 3 years ago, 4 years, I worked under the curacy of 2 males. And then just before COVID, I was sent to the present cure where I am now. And it was during COVID because I made a very bold step to have service on Saturday to accommodate persons who were, because you were only allowed to have a certain amount coming to church on Sunday. So I did a Saturday evening mass. And somebody told the nation and they came. And the next day, someone called me to say congrats. So I asked, what about? And they said, well, not only the service, but to say that you're the first female to hold a double cure in those two churches in that particular part of the island. And you know, with all we have said tonight, there are persons who do support us as female priests, males who back us, who call us aside and give us any little cues that can help us. And I am grateful for it. And I'm really pleased as the chaplain that my seminarian didn't hold on his head to say that I made him shame at the funeral. Thank you so much. Leslie, I will hug you when next I see you for being so bold. But I really do want to say that this has been a very thought-provoking conversation, and to thank Professor Elson, it is for reminding us that what we are talking about steps even beyond the church, because this sort of behavior or culture still shows its ugly head in other organizations and other groups. So thank you all very much. Sonia?
No, you've done a very great job in wrapping us up.
No, it's not. This is not my evening.
But we would like to hear from Leslie and then from Oneka finally. Leslie, final thoughts?
Yeah, we as Reverend Johnson and many others on the panel has saying, we need to change our mindset. We are made in the likeness and image of God, male and female. The scripture says in Ephesians 3 and 28, it says that there is neither male and female anymore, no more. It's all together in Christ. It is unification. It is equality in Christ. So we have to get together so that we can, instead of being always pulling each other apart, but find unity in diversity and be the love of God to a world that needs it. Simple as that. We have no time to bicker, maybe male or female. We have to do this thing together. Let us look at how Jesus worked with the woman at the well in John chapter 4. He talked to her in theological terms, even better than his own disciples. And what she did, the first thing she did was to go back to her city. Come see a man. He has told me all things. Is this the Messiah? Can he be? And the whole city came out. So if you tell me that is not equipping a preacher, not equipping a priest right there, and this is Jesus, she was at the seminary of Jesus, you tell me about that.
Thank you, Leslie. Margaret Innes has sent something for us perhaps to think about as we're thinking of next week. She says, I worship in a parish where females are excluded as serving choir, altar girls, or women. Margaret, would you like to extend that comment? Margaret, are you online with us? We put that in the bucket for next week. So Professor Elson, we solved some things, but we are brought back to the now, or maybe brought back to the before. Reverend Oshun said to us last week, yesterday is still here. Yesterday is still here. And in truth, so even though we are moving and we are progressing, we are embracing change, yesterday is still here. And I think this is what Margaret has reminded us, that in the nitty-gritty, yes, there are still churches who exclude. Yes, Reverend Hinds.
No, I didn't make any comment. I just want to say that really, if the truth is, and I think Leslie mentioned it earlier, that if we want to imagine a church, particularly an Anglican church, with women absent on a Sunday morning, imagine an Anglican church with women not preparing for the worship. Imagine an Anglican church with women not in the choir, in the service, in the Sunday schools. Imagine an Anglican church with no Mothers Union, no Women's Fellowship, no Evergreens. imagine a seminary without women. We really want to talk about having a church where God is continuing to help us to become or to continue to become what he's called us to be, both women and men. So we want to imagine a church with women and men, and a church that allows women who have been ordained to perhaps ask the question, to what extent can we gift the wider church? Can we continue to gift the wider church with our special identity? To what extent can we claim and invite others to continue sharing the vision celebrated and being called by God? So it is trying to recognize that there are these challenges, and Ms. Ennis just reminded us that the challenges are still there. But to see that even when we begin to imagine a church without women, that it will be no church. And therefore we really have to keep on keeping on or pressing on, as Professor Omo would tell us.
Yes, and Professor Omo just sent us a note, Dr. Hinds, on the question of identity. I invite you to follow Reverend Bertram Black Wisdom Gale, priest in charge of the Anglican Diocese of Jamaica and Cayman Islands, on Connect Today with Next Week. Professor Omo, are you saying that we should reach out to the Reverend?
I would just say you can visit his Facebook handle, because he's a very Black guy in Jamaica. He wears locks. You know, I don't know if you know, Jamaica is very conservative, much more conservative than Barbados, right? So in terms of identity, that's another aspect that you can look at, and he uses a lot of dialect in his work, right? So that's another level in terms of identity to really look at what he's doing there. I found it fascinating.
I will give a...
Oh dear, sorry.
And he was talking about Obia. He was talking about Obia. He said that. He was talking about Obia. He says every religion expression is Obia. We just tend to call ours good and someone else's bad.
Yes. Professor Obo, we're being joined by someone. Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, good evening. This is Sister Anna Francis. And I just wanted to concur with your speaker concerning Bertram Gale. He's one of my persons on Facebook, and he's excellent. So very much so. Please do have him to come on board.
Yes, I will reach out. So everyone, Oneka, last word, please. This was your topic. Thank you very much for challenging me, making me think and say, yes, this is a way to start off Culture Through Our Eyes, Camo's guidance. Oneka, what are your final thoughts?
Just agreeing with what Seminarian Leslie said, and Dr. Hinds, Rev. Johnson, that this Jesus movement is an inclusive movement. And what I would like to add as well is that we need to have this, hurry up and have this conversation or these conversations so that we could get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing, looking out for the poor and the vulnerable, and having other discussions on crime and climate change and that sort of thing, instead of, well, I won't say wasting time, but instead of taking up all this energy on this. Not that it's not important, but we need to have this conversation so that we can move past it and look to other things to discuss.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone online. At one stage, we were 51 strong, which is amazing. I never envisioned it, so thank you very much. Let me remind you of what Reverend Oshun has proposed. I cannot guarantee it will remain this, but I love the beginning. So it begins as, let's go again. I'm scrolling to find his statement. It's learning to be, am I right? I have it here. We are creating the poster now. So it is a very interesting thing. And I've somehow missed it, Oneka. I've lost him. Yes, courage to be. Courage to be. Or be the change, as Dr. Hinds said, courage to be. Multiple human identities in the midst of history, globalization, and creolization. I must say, Reverend Oshun Kamo will love that. You will love that complexity that you've brought there. Multiple human identities. So, but I agree with Margaret, who reminded us that there's still some churches where the nitty-gritty of we do not want women in the pulpit, we do not want women leading is there. So we can push on with our thoughts, with envisioning a world of change, and we can help those churches up. Maybe this is where Professor Elson's idea of rotating, of letting churches meet different other females, challenging their stereotype, because it sounds like there's a stereotype of what is a priest. It's a man with the biological equipment, as Leslie said, but all biological equipment is wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us. Culture Through Our Eyes will continue next week. Same time, unless we have a slight change. We will have Reverend Johnson, who is of Ghana and who teaches at the University of Roehampton. He's coming in from London. So his time
Reverend Issue.
Reverend Issue. His time will be 10 o'clock in the night. So I believe, Dr. Hinds, we may have to keep the 6 to accommodate that incredible transition between times.
And we also have another one, Father, don't forget Father Dan,
yes,
Father
of course,
Dan,
Father Dan coming from.
He's from Africa, but I think he's presently working in Colombia.
Right. This is an amazing panel. And of course, Reverend Lynn Harper Johnson will be in the panel as well. So quite a nice, they were thinking of inviting you on again if you so desire, Reverend Dr. Hinds.
Yes, she would be with us. Yes.
Notice you've been invited again, ma'am.
That's my friend. That's my friend.
Thank you very, very much, everyone. Have a good night. See you next week, Thursday.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Look out for our poster. Thank you very much to Mrs. Rita Paris, who I said to her, Culture Through Our Eyes, she imagined the poster. So that's her creation. That's her way of seeing culture through our eyes as a young filmmaker and also as a young PhD. And she's my doctoral student. So I'm giving a step up for her. Thank you ever so much. Thank you, Miss Johnson. You sent me your correct title and I unfortunately don't have it. So I will make sure I have it next time. Yes. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next week. Bye-bye.